If we wanted it to be perfect, we would have recorded it.
Exactly. Hey, everybody. So my name's Dave Carruthers. I'm the CEO and founder of Voxpopme. Delighted to be here today with my good friend Luke Williams. So pre-COVID, me and Luke would regularly meet in a random bar in New York to kind of get together and discuss the state of the industry and kind of what was going on. So I'm delighted that we've been able to, in the absence of being able to do that, bring that format digitally to you, and also invite a couple of good friends and colleagues from the industry who will introduce very shortly. Kind of looking forward to a great kind of debate today. Luke, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, if you're the kind of person who likes to go out and have drinks and talk about research methods and how we use them in business, you're my kind of people. I think this is actually is really cool for me. So Dave and I have known each other, and most people may or may not know me, but my background is in research methods and statistics, right? So when I came out of school, like I was just kind of in the research world. Not many people know this, but my dream was to like go work at the UN and do all different types of triangulated research and have like a cool life traveling the globe. That didn't work out. I ended up, in the market research industry, focusing eventually on CX, but I'm excited for today because I think the power of what this conversation is going to be about, I think will be enlightening for folks who are probably familiar with both methods, but not what happens when you jam them together. So that's what I'm excited about today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we're seeing more and more the importance of quant and qual kind of being brought together. I think up until now they've been kind of very much, I guess, separate bed follows, kind of done in isolation. And I think what we're seeing with the combination of what Voxpopme and Qualtrics have been able to do and bring together is that through that partnership is the ability to kind of close the gap between the two, not have to do these methodologies in silos and things like that. So what we've done today is brought together a couple of our favorite customers, really to talk a little bit more about the work that they've been doing and the importance of bringing quant and qual together to make better decisions. So I just would like to give them a little bit of an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Thomas, do you want to go first? It looks like you're it's in a great location for this call.
Yeah. No, I right in front of the Statue of Liberty, of course. Hi, my name is Thomas Ware. I work with Liberty Mutual in our consumer insights department, working specifically on advertising and decision-making revolving advertising.
Cool. Fantastic. And Derick?
Yes, I am Derick Davidson. I work for Anheuser Busch, the U.S. subsidiary of AB InBev. Here in the U.S. Within the Consumer Insights Division, specifically working in agility and innovation. So I lead the team that works on a lot of our new portfolio and pipeline development, really when it comes to brand extensions, new world brands, all of that fun stuff, really to try to find out how we can meet the ever-evolving and kind of changing needs of our consumer.
Nice. Very cool. So before we jump in, I don't want to pump Dave's tires too much, but I will say that when you look at like kind of like the what like Dave and I do, right, in exchange for money every day, like what these technologies do, the advent of qual at scale is really neat. Obviously, quant research is critically important, right? But I think its nature lent itself to being scaled faster than qual was. So I think we're seeing some really cool changes as a result of being able to do something that used to be like weeks and months in planning, right? I used to do like focus groups back in the day. Like that stuff took a long time. So we could talk about the tech all day, but where I wanted to start actually is like, just forget all that stuff, right? For a second, like what are the problems that you're working on? What are the challenges that the organization is having? What challenges are you seeing in the marketplace that you're highlighting for your orgs? Not related to the tech, like what are the problems you're trying to solve? What are the things that you're trying to crack? And what I would say, like, what's like of those problems, what's changed? What's new and developing versus like what's been here forever, an age-old problem that we're constantly trying to tackle?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Really, I sort of see two main sort of problems along these lines. First being that the quantitative data that we sort of base our decision making off of, a lot of times does a great job of giving us the what of what's going on, rather than just the why. I mean, we had an ad that was particularly popular and exceeded our expectations, but weren't quite sure what about it made it so successful. So qualitative data really makes it a lot easier to sort of understand what's going on behind the numbers, because if the quant's interpreted incorrectly, it's completely worthless. So that's one, sort of getting the why, and then I think the other is I think another thing that can be a little bit difficult is that at times people the numbers don't quite sort of tell the story as well as one would like. That sort of seeing someone saying something and expressing an opinion is a lot stronger than seeing like 73% of people agree with this sentiment. And so qualitative research can be really useful in reinforcing what you're learning from quantitative data with it's usually a little bit more accepted, I find.
And like, what kind of challenges are you applying this to? Is it predominantly in just in the advertising space? Is it like, how are you approaching it a little bit differently there?
Yeah, so most of my work involves advertising and the sort of consumer insights that go along with that. I think sort of how we're applying it a little bit differently is in the past, or at least not in the past, but I think a lot of the inclination of most people is just to sort of use only quantitative data, because that is less, as people see it, less subjective, more does a better job of being completely representative of what's going on. But using sort of qual to understand that a little bit better is something that we're trying to do more. It's not as I said, it's not data interpreted poorly is completely worthless. So I think the value is really sort of getting beyond the what and more the why.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think the one thing I would add to that, right, and we get this in the quant space as well. It's like a lot of the things that we're doing is quantifying qualitative sentiment, right? So that there are absolutely like usage and behavior studies that are measuring like, hey, did you go to the post office last week? You know, how recently have you done these things? Like that tends to be something in a future state would be observational in nature, something you would get through an OData system, like a Big Brother camera system. But a lot of times it's like, hey, how did you feel about this experience? Right? Is absolutely that. So I like that way that you kind of voice that, because it is like it's almost like reverting the thing back to what it was, right? In a lot of, and you're correct in a lot of ways. Like, plus when you see numbers over and over again, people look at trends a lot, right? Humans as like a species are super good at pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. So when patterns don't change, people stop paying attention to it. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that the frequency of the problem hasn't changed, right? So I love the way that's phrased, because I think it makes sense for most people. Like, how many times can I show you the data? And it's like the higher you go in the org, ironically, like the middle layers like needs all that quant. And by the time you get to the CEO's office, it's like the data point opened the door for you, but now you're inside the room. Like, what is the story you tell, right?
It's like the old saying, like one death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic.
That's awful, but yes, thank you. Terrible. Derick.
Go on, Derick.
Yeah, sorry. So just to build on that, totally agree with the sentiment and kind of what it's expressed. I think not just understanding the what and the why, but I think going even a level deeper and really being able to empathize with the consumer really is the true, and I would say the most important piece that we see kind of in our present day and age, because it's really, if you can empathize and you can really like truly understand and put a face to a name or to like a demo or a psychographic cut, it completely changes your interpretation, your perspective, and how well you can kind of internalize information. So more and more, I would say from our perspective, because we use a lot of quant, we use a lot of qual, we use a million different kind of techniques at the end of the day. I would say the ability to, and it's true of like having people attend focus groups is the reason why we have our brand teams or some of our partners like attend focus groups. The getting that empathy and really building and kind of getting them to internalize what people are saying, I would say is the most important facet. And it's the true power really of combining quant and qual is you're able to truly kind of change somebody's opinion and kind of their perspective to make sure you're making the right impact and kind of driving the right change.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. I mean, it's something that we see every day here when we're talking to different customers about that. The impact of a handful of videos a short show reel can make. There's often such a disconnect between organizations and their end consumers. And if you think about the way the world's gone and so many more services are being delivered digitally now, and there's just this huge disconnect. I mean, you think back in the day, the bank manager relationship, the bank manager knew every one of his customers personally and kind of intimately. Now with everything delivered at a distance, there's that intimacy and customer closeness is really disappeared. So being able to bring that customer in has been huge. Derick, Thomas, can you tell us a little bit more about, I guess, in terms of how things have changed in terms of timelines and budgets? I know there's the kind of obvious, everyone's got less and everything needs to be done faster, but like, can you talk a bit about what that means to you day to day and your teams and the pressure that puts you under and how you've kind of found solutions for that?
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. I noticed Mike Brown in the chat said 10 minutes in and no mention of COVID-19. I think both with COVID and with the Black Lives Matter protests that are going on right now is that consumer sentiment is changing very rapidly and very severely is the wrong word, but to a great degree. And so I think that has created a bit more of a pressure on us to really look at what messaging we're putting out and be pushed to do that really, really quickly. That's something that an advertisement that would be okay like 2 months ago might not be now. And so I think there's been a lot more of a push to get things done quickly. And I think one thing, it's been really eye-opening to sort of see that we have that capability. That I think a lot of times, particularly when you're working with data, there can be a little bit of paralysis by analysis. And this environment has where everything really needs to be done quicker has kind of shown us that, yeah, this is possible. So I think the biggest takeaway is that I've been really impressed with how just how quickly we can respond and how quickly we can really get things done.
Yeah, and just to quickly build on it, I would say within our world, I mean, definitely COVID-19 and kind of what's going on within the world today definitely has is a great example, I think, of how the world's changing kind of faster. I think from our perspective, I think we have realized this very much from an innovation perspective for a very long time, that the world is changing faster. Like, we need to be much more agile. We need to be much more flexible. I would say from our perspective, like, we've gone from an environment where like it's okay to create kind of a new product within like 2 years, sort of kind of time horizons, now to where we're creating new products within like 30 days in terms of kind of development life cycles. And so knowing that that has been kind of a constant change, not just in the last 6 months, but really over the last few years, I think we've been very challenged as a business and as an insights team really to rethink a lot of what we do to be able to kind of adapt to that new reality. And obviously there's caveats to everything. I mean, sometimes it is good to take the time and to think and to kind of have those longer term kind of life cycles and time horizons. In other cases, like, you do have to be able to pivot and have to be flexible in order to kind of adapt and kind of meet the ever-changing need of the current environment.
So, the question I just thought of, which I'm
It's going off script now.
doing, like, what was that, Dave? What was that?
I was just saying you're going violently off script now with these random questions. So Thomas, Derick, strap in. Anything could happen right now.
By the way, for the 114 non-video participants, there was no script developed for this thing. Like, we just kind of had a list of topics that we thought were going to be kind of cool and roll with it. But something you just said there made me want to ask this question. So you said like, well, compared to where we were 2 years ago, like when we look at the product innovation cycle versus where we are now, and I think we've seen lots of companies, right? You've seen all the cartoons on LinkedIn of like, we can't do digital innovation, like in the wrecking ball comes in, and everything's got like compulsion. And once everyone starts doing it, then everybody's got to do it. But the question I have is like, as a team, two questions. How has your team, the structure of your team changed over the last 2 years? And what types of, like, if we consider different research methods as like different weapons in the arsenal of an insights and action professional, what different tools are you using in just that 24-month change? And where do you think that you're going to end up, like based on like this pace of acceleration? What do you think is going to change in the next 12 months?
Yeah, a very interesting question. I think so. I'll start with talking a little bit about I guess how we have adapted and changed, because this has been a complete iterative and evolution, I would say, and it's very different in terms of how we have classically operated as an insights team. So first and foremost, I think in a classic environment, we were heavily reliant, I guess, on external partners in terms of meeting all of the needs and getting a lot of the kind of work, the research and things done. And there's a lot of pros and benefits to that sort of environment. The expertise, the level of rigor, all those pieces are massive benefits. And we get a lot of value out of that. But at the same time, I think we very quickly realized that like we can't completely lean on our partners exclusively and expect them to kind of drive the change for us. And so I would say over the last couple years, especially, and really the last year, we've been far more eager basically to start to change and start to rethink kind of how we do insights. And I think the classic, the best way to kind of illustrate this is we've gone from a system where we're 100% kind of reliant on external partners and external agencies, basically to more of a hybrid sort of approach where we know that like there are certain things that we do that like they're probably not worth having like the massive expertise needed to be able to address or to answer. And so some of those things we may have to start to tap into DIY or other sorts of solutions or tools or capability. In other situations, we've formed partnerships between agencies. We've formed kind of joint partnerships between our agencies doing certain things, and then we jump in doing certain things. And so I think as an insights function and system, I think we basically have gone from a very black and white sort of like spectrum of how the industry and how the world works to very much a kind of a gray area sort of approach where there are certain things that we definitely leverage our external partners and external agencies for because they do a great job at what they do, and we really value their expertise. There are other certain things that we do in-house. There are things that we do in the middle, and so it's very fluid in terms of a process, and it's all a matter of like doing the right thing based on kind of whatever the objective or the business question actually happens to be. Into the future, I would say I foresee that continuing to evolve and continuing to change. I think in some cases, certain agencies are starting to speed up and become more in line. And so that may change or evolve kind of how we operate on a day-to-day. But I think fundamentally that need to be nimble and to be flexible and kind of adapt to the changing environment, I think that's going to become a new reality. I think on the client side, we were very quick to realize and adapt to that. I think now we see a lot of partners starting to catch up and realize that they're also fundamentally having to rethink and change kind of the way they operate.
Derick, one thing I think it'd be fascinating to just share with the listeners is I know you guys have done a real partner and really push for a lot more collaboration rather than, oh, well, they do the tracking, they do this, how can you mesh together? Is there anything maybe you can share in learnings from that journey? I know members of my team attended that and they found it extremely valuable.
So which sorry, you kind of broke up. So which program specifically? I'm guessing it's either the consortium that we did or it's I think the consortium,
yeah.
So
the consortium work.
Yeah, and I know we're probably going to talk a little bit about our I-Week process later, but Something I know that we did last year, and it's really kind of born out of our desire to not only kind of adapt as a business, but also help our partners kind of along the way in terms of adapting, knowing that from our perspective, we have a lot of different partners we work with. All of them have very, very key strengths in terms of kind of what they deliver and kind of what they can bring to the table. And in some cases, strengths also reveal kind of deficiencies or kind of opportunity, basically, I would say, for improvement. So something that we've started to do, and I would say we're doing this a little bit more frequently now and kind of in the planning process, but something that we did last year that I know your team attended really was a consortium that we held kind of here in New York with a lot of our like stronger relationships, the companies and the agencies, and in some cases like research and like classic research focus, in other cases more kind of technology oriented. But basically the goal or the objective really was to start to bring a lot of our partners together in the same room to actually start to have conversations, start to showcase a little bit of kind of what can be done when we start to combine kind of the expertise of kind of different territories. So I believe Qualtrics and also Voxpopme were there as part of that conversation, but really to start to challenge the companies to think a little bit differently and basically highlight the fact, and through what we've learned is that like often it's not about kind of expecting one agency to go off and kind of figure out everything. In some cases, we're better off by combining two agencies or kind of the effort of multiple partners together to actually come with a different solution or kind of a different capability that alone they may have not been able to create or kind of bring together. And so it's a little bit of kind of what the consortium was intended to do. And I know we presented a lot of case studies and examples as part of that, but it's also an ethos that we live by. I know you guys were also connected and involved with iWeek, which is our innovation process. And that one's even more complicated because it's not just bringing people together to talk, it's actually bringing like 5 or 6 different agencies together to be able to say, hey, we're all here for the purpose of like creating new products and kind of the new face or the new brands of our company looking 3-5 years out. We need kind of all your partnership, all of your expertise in kind of different territories, and we need you all to work together towards that goal. And so it's the classic example of kind of how not just theoretically bringing them together, but like actively pulling all the people in the same room and kind of working towards that goal of kind of figuring out the solution together.
Yeah. Sorry, Karen.
I was just gonna say, yeah. So I think everyone's gonna want to hear about the iWeek stuff. I think let's do a quick time check here. We got about 30 minutes left, so we got about 20 minutes on our side. So I think we'll do the iWeek stuff a little bit. I wanted to jump over to Thomas real fast to get your reaction to the question of like last 24 months versus next 12 months. How did you get from A to B, and how are we going from B to C? What's going to be different? And then I would also press on that, like, if you're thinking about this with like a mental model of like, oh, this is how we're bucketing techniques or how we're bucketing strategies or the class of issues that we're facing and how we're dealing with them, I think that would be helpful for folks to kind of get some insight into not just what's happening, but how you're approaching the problem.
Yeah, so I think what's really sort of changed in the last couple of years for us is at least the capabilities that we have to collect qualitative data. We've been pretty extensively using Quant for a while, but in the past year or so, even, that we've all of a sudden gained all of these new abilities beyond just focus groups. In the past, that we could have a focus group and you've got to comb through an hour of what you're looking for, and it's a little bit less sort of malleable and harder to sort of utilize in decision making or decision justification or all of that. And I think that with the onset of more digital forms of qualitative research, Voxpopme included, that make it a lot easier to quickly sort, filter, and manipulate qualitative data, that has allowed us to get a much better handle on the environment that we're actually operating in. As for going forward, I think this might be a little bit further out than a year from now, but I think what's really exciting looking into the future is potentially AI and evaluating qualitative data that right now there is, to a certain degree, still a requirement that a person goes and looks at everything and listens to what people are saying. And going forward, that hopefully will become less necessary, and that we can view qualitative data almost as we do quantitatively, that it's just there and it doesn't need to be cleaned or coded to the same degree.
That was my interjection
I
question.
think that's
that was
something
awesome.
we're yeah, and I think that's something that we're already starting to see that shift towards. I think with with Voxpopme, we're able to identify themes without having to pre-code, and a lot of that NLP stuff, kind of being able to kind of create summary videos based on a particular cut or segment that you're interested in without having to manually do that. So yeah, I'd agree, Thomas. I think that's one of the areas I'm most excited about, is how the continued application of AI to qualitative data is really going to streamline what's already become much faster than previously over the next 12 months.
The thing I would add to that, right, is that the analytics layer. Hang on, we got a note from Tracy real fast. I agree, Thomas. Focus groups are valuable. Require a ton of legwork to execute. Yeah, I mean, I think that you just wrote the S1 statement, I guess, for Voxpopme. That's, yeah, and the other part about this that I think is critical is that when people think about like all these different methodologies that are floating around, and even some that I would say are quasi-quant, quasi-qual, right? So when you look at things like implicit association testing, which it is a qualitative reaction, but has known quantitative biases in it, but it's still a really healthy, good, cool thing, especially when you're dealing with people. You want to get them engaged in topics, and like, how do we make research interesting for the respondent as well as for the person? I think always having to A, fish where the fish are, but B, how the fish want to be fished, right, is important. So we have all these satellites of capability of how we induct information into the organization, but how we go through, like, what is our now everybody's got a mechanism for like how they do groceries, right? Like, I do this, then I do this, then I do this. We decontaminate this, and then we bring in the frozen stuff, blah, blah, blah. The same thing is true on the analytics package, like the analytics layer that sits under all this decision-making. The beauty of this is that as it starts to go through that process, the analytics that sit under the qualitative analytic component, like the actual like Bayesian-driven stuff, is the same stuff that's driving all the quant systems, which means if the analytical thesis underneath all of this is the same, it means that the two versions of data become compatible, because we've had to look at data in that way, which I think is really valuable, because let's face it, like without the human interpretation, data are data. They're just columns and rows, right? So there's a way for us to interconnect this information, and we've been dealing with missing data forever. So the fact that we don't have perfection on the data side analytically has been resolved for like 20 or 30 years ago, right? So it's really it's the machine learning aspect that is available today, super cheap, that 5 years ago when everyone was like, oh, I want to do like Hadoop clusters and ML, like nobody knows what the hell you're talking about, right? And nobody's paying for that stuff unless you work in a comp sci role. The average person working in marketing, strategy, decision-making wasn't in that realm, but now they directly benefit from this, and all they care about is value, right? The only thing that person cares about is like, what do I know different from what somebody in my chair at a competitor would know? And how do I make a better decision with that information that they can't make because they can't do what I do? Like, to me, that is like the cool part about it is like, it's just potential everywhere. And it's just a matter of like, how many like knucklehead meetings can I get off my calendar to get down to like working, So to me, that's like the exciting part of all this.
100%. So let's Derick, you touched briefly on iWeek previously, and that was an incredibly intense.
They don't have fiber optic up there in Park City. Dave,
really?
You're cutting out forever. Yeah, that's awful.
Sorry, guys. Okay, it's awful. Okay, I'll let Luke. You asked the question. Let's dive into iWeek.
Yeah, iWeek. Just tell us everything that you're allowed to tell us. But I think the cool part about iWeek for me was, I think, two things. So I'll give everybody this warm up, and maybe Derick, it'll frame it for you. The two things that I thought were cool about this was the compression of the process, right? And then the second thing that happened is that the process changed as a result of the compression. The reason that I like this as a theme is you guys did at AB InBev exactly what technology does at all, right? Tech only does two things. It takes things you used to do and makes them faster, and then ultimately changes the way that you view those things because you move faster, you start thinking differently. So the idea of like the wheel begets a cart, but eventually gets you a space shuttle, right? Like it really sort of challenges the notion of like the way that we were doing it. So Derick, with that lofty expectation, tell us how you built the space shuttle.
Yeah, so I think first to start, I think it's important just to kind of call out and note that it doesn't happen, I would say, without a mindset shift in terms of really thinking differently about kind of what you're doing. And it is like, there's the agile mindset, there's Scrum, there's like lean startup, there's all the books out there to read about it. I would say fundamentally at the end of the day, it's really important to kind of keep in mind that like iWeek just didn't happen kind of out of nothing. We started somewhere, and the goal and objective of it was really to kind of continue to iterate and continue to learn and kind of develop over time, not only to kind of create innovation, but really innovate the process itself. And so we went into it, and it's been a very iterative process. It actually started, I would say, in 2016, and it was literally us in a room with like insights and our innovation teams and our brand teams, going into workshops with consumers, and it was very scrappy process, somewhat helpful, didn't have a lot of kind of the rigor behind it, but it was kind of the first step really to kind of trying to accelerate and trying to kind of change up how we innovate and how we do early stage ideation. And from there, it's just gotten progressively more advanced in terms of like the scope and the scale and what we actually do. Where kind of over time we've embedded concept testing, we've embedded qualitative groups, we've embedded kind of live focus group sessions, we've embedded actually having live consumers there to do a bit of kind of early stage kind of ideation and prototyping of products. And so it's been a very iterative process, and I think a lot of that is really through the approach of critically looking at like what works, what did we get out of it, like what did it address from a business perspective, and like where are the gaps in terms of what we can continue to optimize and improve. But at a high level, basically what it's allowed us to do in the most recent years is basically create not only have an iWeek, but have an iSemester process where we're rooting basically our planning cycle really into the focus on of trying to evolve and kind of meet the changing needs of the consumer. And so it starts really by, before we even get into the process, going out, doing empathy building sessions and missions with tied to communities. So literally having consumer communities, having kind of live in-market experiences to deeply create the empathy, understand the needs, really understand kind of who consumers are, kind of why they do what they do all of those empathy building things, which evolves into a process of early stage ideation, which ultimately gets us to the actual iWeek process, which is basically a rapid paced, literally 4 days / 5 days. Final day is really kind of more strategy setting, but it's really kind of a rapid 4-day process where you start the week basically by downloading on all of what you know and learned, downloading on kind of the gaps and understanding kind of where we need to start to fish, I guess you could say, in terms of creating opportunities, literally working with designers, brewers, our logistics teams, our legal teams, kind of brand teams, all of the various stakeholders kind of within the business to come up with early stage ideas to basically then take into overnight screening, which obviously classic concept testing, but I would say about 2 years ago, we embedded Voxpopme into that process to get a little bit richer and deeper in terms of kind of what we were learning, because the quant itself isn't sufficient to kind of tell you the full story. You often miss things if you're just looking at the quant data. And so really embedding kind of that overnight screening into the process. And then the next day, allowing for like deeper qualitative and actually review of a lot of the Voxpopme video to get a very clear understanding of like what's working, why is it working, what's not working, kind of why is that, then working with the teams to deconstruct, rebuild ideas, send it back into overnight screening again. But really creating this very iterative process where you have multiple learning loops with consumers to really calibrate and to, at the start of the week, know that like what you begin with is kind of an MVP. It's kind of like basic solution or a basic idea of what you want to create, but creating those learning loops so that by the end of the week, you can get the concept more calibrated, more fine-tuned, and closer in to something that could exist kind of in market. And I think we both mirrored the process from a learning perspective, but also from a development perspective, where we have like graphics designers literally by the end of the week rendering out full CGI level graphics of like, this is what the product will look like as it actually hits shelves. And so it's very impressive. I think it's obviously a massive undertaking every single year. I think the setup time becomes longer and longer. We're already talking about it for next year. But it basically is really the compression of kind of all of the things you classically need to do within an innovation kind of process, but really condensing that down into a 4-day period so that you can have all of the collaboration, all of the partners, all the people you need really in the same room at the same time to basically be able to craft and kind of create the right kind of solutions to meet the needs of our consumers.
One quick question, and then I want to ask Thomas something. Do you guys do that off-site? Do you guys go to like an innovation center or like do it with a bunch of beer lying around? Like do you guys do that somewhere? No comment. I'll take no comment.
Just one thing, just to kind of give some people some context and quantification of kind of what iWeek looked like from the Voxpopme side of things. I think on day one, the kind of first overnight concept testing, we tested 200 concepts in that 36-hour period, capturing 3,000 minutes of video and generating 40 automated insights, highlights, reels of the best performing concepts. So just to give kind of a scale of that, being able to get qualitative feedback on that many concepts in 36 hours was a testament to the work that Derick and the team had done and the technology to support that, and a great combination of quant and qual together.
So for sure, and I'm sure that there were probably a lot of sleepless nights. You guys worked through that for us.
So building on that theme of quant and qual, Thomas, I want to press on you. Ready? So
ready.
I like the idea of mixed methods all up, because the more we do mixed methods, I think the more it approximates, human sensory and process. Like the more, like there's all types of subtle cues in video that you can't tease out in quant. There's all kinds of techniques that are appropriate in quant environments that probably, we've seen the difference between what happens if you do like big conjoint studies and the accuracy of price targeting versus when we used to do like mall tests, right? Because I'm a man of a certain age and I remember when I used to have to do that stuff. Like, so we've seen what happens when we've seen when companies do all the different methods, but don't necessarily integrate them, that they get some kind of challenge between like conflict between interpretations, as opposed to having a limbic system in your brain that's sort of calibrating and prioritizing simultaneously. So challenge question to you. Has there been like something that you can think of in recent memory, last 2 years? Doesn't have to be huge, could be just like mid-range strategy level, whatever, where by using both quant and qual together, you made a substantively different decision than you would have done if you had only one or the other, where creating a hybrid between the two allowed you, an individual actor with a strategy team, to have a discernible, differentiated opinion that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And how bad would it have been if you only had one? But I mean, like a nicer version of that, but you know what I mean? What's that? Like, so you got 100 plus people still on the call. Like, they're probably doing both, right? They're probably getting a little bit of both. Like, what's your story of like, we did this different?
Yeah. So I think a lot of what we do is trying to get an idea of, quite frankly, what's funny. And that a lot of times it's very subjective, very difficult to do. So many different people have tons of different opinions as to what they like, what they don't like. And so I think in looking specifically at the sort of marrying quant and qual lens, and I brought this up briefly earlier, but we had an ad that a couple months ago that just outperformed our expectations wildly. We had done a lot of quant testing before the ad, before we produced the ad, before we put the ad in market, and it had certainly done well, but hadn't, but not to the extent that we saw. And when we put it in market, it was wildly popular. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's the ad with Bad Job, the ad where the actor continually messes up and can't say Liberty Mutual. So anyways, we knew that it was particularly successful. And we didn't, I think that the tough part is knowing, is my speaker working? It says it's not.
It's a little choppy.
Little choppy.
But don't worry, we're going to dub over it.
Okay. Well played. Well played. I like that. Yeah. So, anyways, that a lot of times it's very difficult to sort of tell what works with certain ads and why things are funny, and that we might just if we are looking at producing ads going forwards, we might just sort of think like, oh, well, it's this actor specifically, or oh, it's the idea of someone sitting in front of or standing in right where I am right now, and talking and making a joke that's particularly successful. And seeing, we did a lot of qual testing, trying to get an idea of really sort of why, what made this so successful. And ultimately, we came across the idea of people like people messing up, people like bloopers, and that is something that we want to sort of consider going forward. And it fits really well with an insurance sort of motif, that we're there when things don't go as you expect them to, when things get messed up. So I'm not can't go into too much detail about sort of how that's going to affect decision making going forward, but it's certainly something that we are sort of considering and keeping in mind as we sort of produce the next generation of Liberty ads.
That, to me, there's an analogy in there, right? So like the world of like the insights to action professional, as I like to call them, is like, so like when I first came out of school, like I was like Mr. Rigid research methods. I was like running up and down the halls, telling everybody the right way to do things. And then just like at the end of the day, it's like, we're talking about, it does, like, the things don't have to be perfect. They just have to be good, right? They just, and our ability to differentiate between like what is good and not good is much better than our ability to differentiate between getting a 97 on a test and a 98. And I like this, obviously, for insurance. Insurance has spent a good deal of time over the past 2 years reinventing itself, focusing in on value of like, not how do we sell the policy that we've got, but how do we like understand customers differently? How do I understand the software engineer who's 4 years out of school, who makes 160 grand a year, but lives with 8 of his friends, doesn't own a car, owns four sets of clothes, but has a $6,000 drone? Like, how do I figure out like how to message to that person? There has to be more than one. And also, as the cohort changes, so too will the mixture of the methods. Like I think there's always going to be a need for quant and qual in all of their forms, right? I think what'll happen is we'll stop misusing things, right? I think surveys in some instances have been misused in the past. I think in the, like people trying to do 40 million surveys for like a contact center. It's like, you probably don't need that much, right? Maybe 39 million will do. But it's like, you also see people misusing qual. I think part of this is like the skill set that comes with the tech, right? So it's like when they teach you SPSS, or at least they did when I was a grad student 15 years ago, or 16 years ago. Like that was designed to teach you statistics through a thing. But the platforms that we use today change how we approach problems. So it's really meaningful to like understand like which technologies am I going to include in my process. And it's not about being perfect. It's about understanding where imperfection lies so you can calibrate for it, right? That's it. It's like, your golf swing's not perfect. Doesn't mean you stop playing golf. You just figure out how to shimmy, right? And make it work. And you'd much rather have the scale of whatever technology brings, as opposed to like sitting in a corner and not having it be perfect. But I like that idea. I like that, things don't have to be perfect, especially with the perception around, right? It's like, if you would have done like a perceptual map, old school perceptual map, you wouldn't have expected an insurance company to do something funny. I think honestly, like Aflac did that in insurance, and Geico did that a long time ago in terms of like shaking things up a little bit, because what you're trying to deliver in insurance of like surety, cared for, listened to, is hard to feel authentic through lots of channels. So you have to like open humans up another way. So,
Yeah, there's also, I mean, there's a difficulty that on the one hand, like we're selling a serious product that on the one, like when someone gets into a car crash or there's an issue with their house, like it's a serious thing. On the other hand, that people don't want to sit in front of a TV screen and be told about like the minutia of different policies that are being offered. So it's definitely a tough sort of line to toe. And going off your point of sort of understanding where imperfections lie, one of about working in this industry is that there is that the sort of best practices are to a certain degree not really known yet. That there's tons of methods available and tons of data that didn't used to exist even 10 years ago, and that figuring out how to use them in the best way is a very sort of active and iterative process. And on top of that, I mean, companies, once they figure it out, generally don't want to share it. So everyone to a certain degree has to do it on their own. So that's one of the things that I think is the most exciting about being in this industry, that you kind of are learning as you go, no matter how long you've been in, just because the environment keeps changing.
Absolutely. So let's jump into some Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in. First one from Trent and Krantz. So it's a bit of an age-old question, really. So kind of definitely interested, Derick, Thomas, to hear your stance on this. But it's kind of, do you prefer to use qual research to understand quantitative data that you've already collected, or use quant data to validate qualitative insights that you've kind of captured up first? Is there a order you find best? Does it vary based on the situation? Kind of what's your perspective on that?
Sure. So I think that whenever you're going into any sort of quantitative data, that you need to have sort of a hypothesis of sort of what you're looking for. So I don't think it's necessarily like an either or proposition, that there needs to be sort of a qualitative idea driving the research that you're doing. You could go out and collect mountains and mountains and mountains of data, but it's completely useless if there's no sort of tailoring to what it is that you're looking to learn. So I think the qualitative is certainly used in sort of setting up quantitative data, and at times qualitative research that you get from a focus group or wherever else, social media comments even, can alert you to something that you might want to sort of learn about a little more and understand on a deeper level. I think that when quant sort of validates whether or not that sort of hypothesis is accurate, then qual can sort of again be used to understand that a little bit better. So I guess I wouldn't say necessarily that it's one or the other, that I think the two kind of have to be married going forward throughout.
Yeah, I would say personally, as a research person, it's where I start depends on where I am, right? So it's like if I'm in a scenario where I have a lot of quant data, and I kind of have some structure to the problem that I'm studying, then that will dictate something, versus I walk into a place and like I got handed an issue and said like, hey, go figure out, which diversity and inclusion partners would be most valuable to us and how people would feel about that. Like I'm probably going to start in a very different place. I'm probably going to start with qual there, right? Before we think about how to hone the questions that we should be asking. So I think it is highly dependent on, it's like anything else, right? They're tools, they are equivalent. They do different things. It's a hammer and a screwdriver, not the same, right? But you're probably using them on the same project.
Yeah.
Derick, anything you'd like to add?
No, I totally agree. I think Luke said it nicely. It's a tool. It's very much based on the scenario, the situation, also, the only thing I would add beyond the research objectives, in some cases, it's based on a little bit of the stakeholders you're working with, and how married they happen to be to certain kind of hypotheses or ideas. And so often, like, we may throw qual into the back end of quant simply because, like, we believe that they haven't considered or been as open to the full spectrum of what the answer truly could be. So it is variable kind of based on the scenario and the situation.
Definitely. I think whether, talking to that rational side of the brain or the emotional side of the brain, it's to really influence stakeholders, get them on board and drive action. We've seen that video output has been huge for kind of connecting on the emotional side, as you say, and on the empathy side of things. A couple other questions. Colton Gardner has just been asked kind of how kind of the Voxpopme and Qualtrics platforms combine to kind of pull quant and qual into the same place. I'm going to touch on this super briefly, but very happy to kind of, if anyone's got any more questions, to take follow-ups via email and things like that. But essentially, we wanted to enable the many companies out there that are leveraging Qualtrics to be able to do qualitative directly inside the Qualtrics platform. So we launched a number of things to be able to do that. The first being an XM solution, which enables anyone within Qualtrics to deploy agile video surveys. So multiple video questions deployed for a Qualtrics survey in exactly the same way that you used to. So being able to get that survey created very quickly, and then all of the data being an analysis being done by Voxpopme on the back end, and being able to very easily link through to see that within there. We've also been investing a lot into the reporting and dashboards things. So for clients that are using Qualtrics for CX, EX, being able to pull videos back into your Qualtrics reporting dashboards. So making dashboards not just about kind of metrics and gauges, but putting the face of the customer into there. So being actually able to see, as you're looking at a Qualtrics dashboard, slice and dice that data by any cohort segment, the videos will on the fly update. So you're actually able to see real customer stories alongside that data. And then finally, the ability to just embed Voxpopme video questions into any Qualtrics survey has been available for some time, but essentially kind of, you're really kind of pushing that qual hybrid side of things. So lots more planned in terms of that, those integrations, but those are just a couple of ways that these two systems are working together kind of seamlessly to be able to allow researchers to have kind of deploy video research all in one place. Next questions from Ryan is around kind of growing concerns around PII, CCPA in California. How are we kind of navigating that PII issue? Obviously, data security and compliance and legislation around privacy is a good thing and continues to get stricter. It's obviously something that we're very aware of and have policies and processes in place. A lot of it's around consent and informed consent. So allowing the consumer or the person taking that survey to know what the video is going to be used for, how it's going to be used. You can't just capture video feedback and, next thing you're appearing on a Liberty Mutual billboard in the middle of Times Square. These things, we have to, have the correct wording, within here and things like that. And then things like data retention policies, so automatic deletion in GDPR locations after a couple of years and things like that. So it's but I think what's changed is, whilst we have seen more privacy law, what we have seen is more and more people willing to go and record themselves. If you think about, there probably isn't many people in the world now that haven't ever pressed the red button on their phone. So that ability and frictionless nature of being able to record a video is bringing responses in from maybe people who aren't always taking surveys and things like that. So it's broadening the cross section of people that we're able to hear from.
The other thing I would add from the Qualtrics side, I'm not going to go into detail. You can find all that stuff on the website. It's one of those things that Qualtrics really prides itself on. We're a tech first company, and they were way ahead on all of the data safe harbor laws in the EU, followed by all the EMEA restrictions and all the PII stuff in California they're on top of. Our security team is lights out. They love being asked these questions because they've got reams and reams of everything they've been doing. So if you want to, it's just qualtrics.com/platform/security. And you can literally talk to a specialist there if you want to. But yeah, and a very good point, because actually a lot of platforms don't have that stuff. So Qualtrics being a FedRAMP certified provider, we went through the ringer for 5 or 6 years to get that accreditation. You can see all the accreditations there, and that would include, what are we doing about California? Obviously, we have lots of clients in California, but I also say as part of SAP, you know, big, gigantic, you know, multinational conglomerate, they probably wrote that law. So I think we're all safe on that side. I forgot we were recording that. That was a joke. Just be very clear.
In terms of the questions, I don't think there's any more that haven't been covered. If there is, Luke, any final thoughts you kind of want to add in terms of this combination and of quant and qual? Thomas, Derick, and if any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap this up?
I think the one thing that go ahead, Luke.
No, I was just laughing that that's like the one thing we're stumped on.
I think honestly, the only thing that we really haven't sort of covered is sort of the importance of disassociating oneself with data, and that becomes more difficult with qual. Particularly when you're dealing with resistance towards utilizing data, that it's a lot easier to say the data says X with quant than it can be with qual. So I think that when sort of utilizing qual, it's particularly important to sort of disassociate oneself, and that it's not my opinion. This is what people are saying. But it's probably the only other thing I wanted to add.
The last thing I would wrap up on is if you want to geek out on this stuff, let us know. Like we can do one of these things as like a round table, and we'll do it at like 4:00 on a Thursday so everyone can drink. But if you're thinking about these things, you've got a little community here of people you saw, 100 people on that line, 100 plus. Like talk to each other. You know, talk to us, talk to each other. We can put you in touch with people. Like we want to be able to create value, not just by us talking about stuff and showing you stuff, but like as a community, right? That's all aimed at the same things. Don't feel alone. Reach out, be provocative.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to spend it with us this morning. It's been fantastic to share this conversation with you all. Huge thank you to Thomas and Derick for giving up time in their very, very busy schedules. Thomas, we look forward to seeing more Liberty Bibbity ads coming out of the shop. Derick, I can't wait to see what ABI comes up with in the next iWeek. So yeah, very exciting times ahead, I'm sure. Thanks, everyone.
All right. See y'all.